The first time I told my best friend I was in love with her, I was in the middle of losing an argument about sandwiches. We were standing in her kitchen at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, both of us in our work clothes because neither of us had bothered to change. And Waverly was holding a piece of sourdough bread above her head like evidence in a court case. She had been explaining, with the kind of patience usually reserved for explaining things to golden retrievers, why a grilled cheese did not technically qualify as a sandwich. I had been explaining that she was wrong about everything. The argument had been going for 20 minutes. I did not care about sandwiches at all. I just liked watching her talk when she thought she was winning. "Fine," she said, dropping the bread on the cutting board and pointing at me. "You want to be right? Fine. I love you, but you are so wrong about this it physically hurts me." I froze. Not because she said it. She'd said it 100 times. We'd been friends for 4 years, and Waverly said, "I love you the way other people said goodbye," casually, as punctuation, at the end of a thought that had nothing to do with love at all. I said it back the same way. It had never meant anything, except that we were the kind of friends who meant it. But that night, standing in her kitchen with flour on her shirt and her hair falling out of whatever she'd done to it that morning, I heard myself say it back, and something in my chest cracked open like a door I hadn't realized was locked. "I love you too," I said. She had already turned back to the cutting board. I stood there holding a paper towel I didn't need, and feeling like I'd just said something completely different from what she'd heard. "My name is Eli." "No, wait. That's in the file. My name is Bennett Shaw. I'm 29. I work in commercial real estate in Nashville, which means I spend most of my days convincing people that a building is worth more than they think, or less, depending on which side of the table they're sitting on. I am good at reading rooms, reading contracts, reading the fine print on things other people assume, say what they look like, they say. I am not, apparently, good at reading the person I have eaten dinner with 3 nights a week for the past 4 years. Her name is Waverly Knox. She's 30, a pediatric occupational therapist at Monroe Carell Jr. Children's Hospital downtown, which means she spends her days helping kids learn to hold pencils and button shirts and do the things that are supposed to come easy and don't. She had a voice that went quiet when something mattered and loud when she was performing, not caring. She wore her hair in a knot that was never quite finished. She left half-empty coffee mugs on every flat surface in her apartment and then spent 10 minutes looking for them. She laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. For 4 years, I had been her person. The one she called when her landlord was being unreasonable, and when she got good news, she hadn't told anyone else yet, and when she couldn't figure out why a Tuesday felt wrong. I was the one who knew she hated being touched when she was stressed, but needed someone in the same room, who knew her order at every restaurant we'd been to more than twice, who knew the difference between the voice she used when she was fine and the voice she used when she was fine. For 3 of those 4 years, I had been trying very hard not to be in love with her. I had done a reasonable job of it. Mostly, you develop a skill set. You learn to route things around the sore spot. You make jokes when it gets too close. You become excellent at the kind of friendship that looks, from the outside, like it's not secretly killing you. Then in February, Waverly's dad had a heart attack. Not the kind that's immediately obvious. He'd driven himself to urgent care with what he thought was indigestion, and they'd admitted him within an hour. Waverly found out at 7:15 in the morning when her mother called, and she found out I had already been outside her building at 7:20 when she came downstairs in a coat over her pajamas, keys in her hand, face completely white. "How did you know?" she asked. "Your mom texted me after she called you." She stared at me. "My mom has your number?" She asked for it at Christmas. I didn't question it. Something in her face did something complicated. Then she got in my car. Her dad spent 11 days in the hospital and came home with a new diet, a long list of restrictions, and a cardiologist he called that kid, despite the man being 43 years old. Waverly spent those 11 days commuting between work and Vanderbilt University Medical Center, managing her mother's panic alongside her own, making phone calls, filling out forms, asking the right questions because she knew how hospitals worked, and most people didn't. I drove her. I sat in waiting rooms. I brought food in bags she usually forgot to open. One night I sat outside a hospital room for 2 hours while she slept in a chair beside her father's bed, and I read every article on my phone and watched the hallway and did not go in because she hadn't asked me to come in. She just needed to know I was there. Afterward, she told me that was the thing. Not the driving or the food or any of it. Just that I knew which one she needed. I didn't know how to tell her that I had been studying her for 3 years. That knowing what she needed had become the closest thing I had to a hobby. By April, her dad was home and improving, and Waverly had stopped looking like she was waiting for her phone to ring with bad news. But something had shifted between us in those weeks, small and difficult to name, like a piece of furniture had been moved 2 inches, and you kept almost hitting your knee on it. She started sitting closer. Not noticeably, not in a way she would have been able to point to, but I noticed. I noticed because I had been keeping careful track of the acceptable distance between us for years, and she was updating the rules without telling me. Which brings me back to July and the sandwich argument and her kitchen at 11:30 at night. I drove home that evening with the radio off, which I never did. By the time I got to my apartment, I had decided very firmly that I was not in love with Waverly Knox and that whatever had happened in her kitchen was a minor miscalibration of some kind and not a symptom of anything serious. I was also the guy who did fine print for a living. I knew what I was reading. 3 weeks later, we went to her coworker's birthday party. It was at a rooftop bar in Midtown, the kind of place where the drinks cost $16 and nobody says anything about it. Waverly had asked me to come because, in her words, she was going to know exactly 4 people there, and 2 of them are definitely going to ask why I'm still single and I need a human decoy. I went as her decoy. I told myself that was what I was doing. The night was warm and the skyline was lit up, and I found Waverly by the bar. In a dark blue dress I hadn't seen before and heeled sandals she would complain about for the entire ride home. Her hair was actually done, which was rare enough that I noticed. She was laughing at something the birthday girl had said, head tilted back, and I stood there for a moment, just watching her from across the roof. Then she spotted me and waved like I was the solution to a problem she hadn't mentioned, and I crossed the roof, feeling like I was crossing something else entirely. We survived 2 hours of mingle and circulate. I carried her drink when she needed both hands. She introduced me as my Bennett to 4 people, which was a thing she did without thinking that was slowly dismantling me from the inside. Then her coworker Simone's husband, a large friendly man named Douglas who had clearly had a great time, pointed at us from across the group and said loudly, "You know what? That's a couple right there. I don't care what anyone says." Half the circle turned. Waverly rolled her eyes. "Douglas, I'm serious. The way he's holding your jacket? That's not a friend. Friends don't hold jackets like that." I looked down. I was, in fact, holding her jacket in a way that was not strictly platonic. Someone said, "Oh, are you 2 together?" Someone else said, "I thought they were already together." Waverly glanced at me. The look lasted half a second too long. "We're friends," she said. The word landed cleanly, correctly, like it always had, and I said quietly, more to her than to the group, "Lucky me." I meant it as a deflection. The word I meant as something else entirely. Waverly's expression did something I couldn't name. Not discomfort, not quite. More like she'd heard a note in a song she didn't expect. The group moved on. The conversation shifted. But Waverly stayed close for the rest of the night, in a way that was different from her usual close, and twice I caught her looking at me like she was working something out. On the ride home, she was quiet. Waverly was not usually quiet. "You okay?" I asked. "Thinking." "About?" She looked at the window. "Lucky you." "What about it?" "You said it like you meant something." "I meant I'm lucky to have you as a friend." "Bennett." Her voice was even. "Careful. I've known you for 4 years." I didn't answer. "That's not what you meant." The exit came up and I took it because it gave me something to do with my hands. The city moved past. A gas station. A Walgreens. The light at Wedgwood going red. "Wav, don't." One word. Not a warning. Just honest. Like she was asking me to stop building an exit route out of a conversation we were already in. "Just tell me what you meant." There are moments when the joke you've been preparing doesn't come, when the safe version of the thing you're feeling doesn't materialize the way it always has. I had been running deflections on this particular truth for 3 years, and I had gotten very good at it. But Waverly was looking at me with an expression that said she already knew the shape of the answer and was just waiting for me to stop pretending she didn't. So I said, "It wasn't nothing." Her breath shifted. I don't mean tonight, I said. I mean all of it, every time I show up. It's not because that's what friends do. It's because I stopped at another light, because it's you. I show up because it's you. The light changed. I drove. Waverly didn't say anything. For so long I started building myself a very small and extremely premature funeral. Then she said, "How long?" I laughed, but it came out wrong. Does it matter? Yes. Why? Because it changes what I've been not saying. I took my eyes off the road for half a second. She was looking at her hands. Her fingers were twisted together in her lap, which was a Waverly tell. I knew the way I knew my own name. "What have you been not saying?" I asked. She was quiet for another moment. "After Dad's thing," she finally said. "After all of it, I kept thinking about how I didn't have to explain myself to you. Like I didn't have to explain why I was scared or why I was holding it together or why I needed you in the waiting room and not in the room. You just knew. And I kept trying to figure out why that felt different She stopped. "I think I thought it was just you being a good friend. It is. I know." She looked at me. But I started thinking about it like, what if it isn't only that? What if it's also something else? We were pulling onto her street. I found a spot 2 buildings down and parked without saying anything because I needed to be stopped to have this conversation. "When did you start thinking that?" I asked. She thought about it. "Sometime in March. When I started noticing that I was telling you things before I decided if I believed them yet." That hit somewhere specific. I turned to look at her. She was already looking at me. In the streetlight coming through the windshield, she looked exactly like herself, tired and a little nervous and completely unsentimental about it, the way she was about everything that actually mattered to her. "Lucky you," she said softly, almost like a question. "Lucky me," I said. She reached across the center console and put her hand over mine. It was a small thing, a careful thing, the kind of touch that was asking something without using words, because she wasn't sure what answer it would get. I turned my hand over and held hers. She let out a breath, slow and shaky and trying very hard not to be. "I don't want to do this wrong," she said. "Neither do I. 4 years is a lot to break, or a lot to start with." She looked at our hands, then at me. "You've thought about this." "I've thought about this." "How long, Bennett?" It wasn't a question this time. I looked at the steering wheel, then back at her. "Since the night you corrected my grocery list." She stared at me. What? "You texted me a grocery list once, 3 years ago, because I asked what I should bring to your thing, and you texted it back fixed. You'd reorganized it by aisle." "That's insane." "I know. You fell for me because of a grocery list?" "I fell for you because of the grocery list, and approximately 400 other things I have been cataloging for 3 years because I didn't know what else to do with them." She made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Her fingers tightened around mine. "I was going to ask you something tonight," she said. "At the party. Before Douglas and his jacket commentary, what were you going to ask?" She looked at me very directly. "If you wanted to get dinner sometime." "Not our dinner. A different kind." The streetlight hummed. Somewhere down the block a dog was barking at something it would never catch. "Waverly Knox," I said. "Are you telling me you were going to ask me out?" "I was working up to it. You had a plan. I had the beginning of a plan. What was the rest of the plan?" "I was going to assess the vibe after the question and go from there." I laughed. It came out real. She laughed too, and the sound of it filled the car and made the whole conversation feel suddenly less like something fragile and more like something we'd been building toward for long enough that it wasn't going to break if we touched it. "I want to," I said. "Get dinner. The different kind." She looked at me with something that might have been relief if she'd been willing to call it that. "Okay," she said. "But first, what?" I reached out and tucked the piece of hair behind her ear that had been escaping her done-up hair all night. She went very still. My hand rested against her jaw for a moment. "Can I?" I asked. She answered by leaning in. "The first time I kissed Waverly Knox, it was in the front seat of my car on Linden Avenue at midnight with the radio off, and the streetlight coming through the windshield and her hand still holding mine across the center console. It was not long, and it was not dramatic. But when she pulled back, she looked at me for a long, quiet moment like she was adjusting to a room that had been rearranged. Then she said, "That was different from what I expected. Good different. Much better different." She cleared her throat. "Okay, I need to go upstairs before I make a decision I'm not ready for. Understood, I'm serious. I know you are. Don't look at me like that. Like what? She pointed at my face. Like that. Stop it. I had no idea what my face was doing. I stopped doing it. She opened the car door, then turned back. 7 o'clock, Saturday. There's a place on 12th I've been wanting to try. I'll be there. She stepped out, then leaned back in. Bennett? Yeah. I've been telling you I love you for 4 years and apparently meaning more of it than I realized. She closed the door before I could answer. I sat in my car for another 15 minutes, watching the lights go on in her apartment, which I realized, while doing it, was the most embarrassing thing I had ever done in my life, and also could not bring myself to stop. I slept terribly. I woke up at 6:12 to a text that said, "You're not getting here early, right?" "I need to pick the restaurant first," I replied. "I thought you already picked it." I picked one. Now I want to pick a better one. Me. It's not until Saturday. Her research takes time, Shaw. I was smiling at my ceiling like I was 17 years old. I was fine with that. By Saturday afternoon, I had changed shirts twice, decided against flowers, then bought a small bunch of wildflowers from the farmer's market on 8th because they looked like the kind of thing that didn't have a marketing department behind it. I stood outside the restaurant on 12th Avenue South at 6:58 with the flowers in the calm of a man submitting his tax returns under audit. Waverly arrived at 7 exactly. She was wearing dark trousers and a silk blouse in a color that was almost green, and heeled shoes she would absolutely complain about, and her hair was actually down, which I had seen maybe a dozen times in 4 years, and I forgot briefly what I had intended to say. She looked at the flowers. "Are those from the farmer's market?" "Yes. How'd you know I'd like those better then?" "Because you once said roses feel like a bouquet generated by an algorithm." She took them, smiled. "You've been paying attention." "I've been paying attention." She stepped closer and kissed me once, brief and confident, like she'd been deciding to do it for several blocks and had finally arrived at the moment. Then she said, "Okay, let's go be awkward at each other over pasta." We were, in fact, awkward. For the first 20 minutes, we behaved like two people who had met at a conference and were trying to find common ground. I asked what she'd done that afternoon, and she looked at me and said, "I reorganized my spice cabinet," which we both knew. I already knew she did every time she was nervous, and then she buried her face in her menu. "We are terrible at this," she said from behind the menu. "Historically, yes." She lowered it. "Okay, real questions. Things we somehow haven't asked in 4 years. Go. What's the thing you're most proud of that you've never told anyone?" She blinked. Then she set the menu down entirely. "Okay, apparently we're doing that immediately." "You said real questions." She thought for a moment, genuinely, not performing thought. "When I was 25, I had a patient, a 6-year-old boy, who couldn't hold anything without dropping it. Motor coordination issues, no obvious cause, and we'd been working on it for 8 months with not much progress. Then one afternoon, he picked up a crayon and drew a circle. Just a circle. And he looked at me and said, 'I did it.'" Her voice softened. "I went to the parking garage afterward and cried for 10 minutes. I've never told anyone that." I looked at her. "That's a good one." "What's yours?" I thought about it. "I once talked a homeowner out of a development deal that would have made me a $60,000 commission because I actually believed it was the wrong call for her." Waverly tilted her head. "What happened?" "She called me 6 months later. Said she'd found a better deal I hadn't even been involved in, but she used me for it because of that." "That's also a good one." "We have good ones." "We do," she said. After that, dinner stopped being awkward. We ordered too much. We talked through the pasta and into the tiramisu, and past the moment when the restaurant filled up and then started to thin out again. Waverly ate with her elbow on the table, which was a habit she had never broken, and which she claimed she was not aware of, and I watched her tell a story about her nephew's baseball game and thought that this exact thing was what I had been missing for 3 years by keeping myself on the right side of a line I'd drawn unilaterally. Walking to the car afterward, she took my hand without making anything of it, like it was something we'd always done and were just now getting around to. "I want to say something," she said. "Okay. I'm scared." I looked at her. She was looking straight ahead. "Not of you," she said. "Of what happens if this goes sideways. You're the person I call, Bennett. When things are good and when they aren't. I don't have a backup for you." "I know. So if I know." I stopped walking. She stopped too. We were in a parking lot on 12th, the kind of place that had no particular significance and which I now knew I was going to remember in specific detail for the rest of my life. I've been scared of that for 3 years. That's why I didn't say anything. But you're saying it now, because I don't want to keep not saying it. I turned toward her. I want to say it. I want the version of us where I don't have to decide which feelings to route around. I want to be scared of losing this and choose it anyway, because it's you, and I'm done choosing carefully over choosing you. She looked at me for a long moment. That was well said. I've had 3 years to draft it. She laughed. Then she stepped into me, both arms wrapping around my waist, her forehead dropping to my shoulder. I held her in the parking lot while a couple walked past, and someone's phone rang of what 2 rows over, and the city kept doing what cities do. When she lifted her head, her eyes were bright and she wasn't trying to do anything about it. Kiss me like we're not figuring this out, she said. Are we still figuring it out? No, she said. I figured it out. So I kissed her in the parking lot on 12th Avenue South, with no audiences, no running jokes to hide behind, no version of it that could be mistaken for something else. When I pulled back, she stayed close. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, you can walk me home. I thought you drove. I did. She straightened up, still holding one of my jacket lapels. I'm choosing the scenic route. We walked 4 blocks in the wrong direction before she admitted she didn't know where she'd parked. I found the car in 11 minutes using the locator on her phone, which she claimed was cheating. I claimed it was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her, and she told me to never say that again. 2 nights later, she had seat 9:30 while I was watching a game I had lost interest in. Hi, she said. Hi, I keep thinking about the parking lot. I turned the TV off. Yeah, which part? All of it. But mostly. She paused. When you said you were done choosing carefully over choosing me, I keep thinking about that, good or bad. Good. Very good. Another pause. I'm just not used to being chosen out loud. I sat with that for a moment. You should get used to it, I said. She was quiet. Then, I'm working on it. 3 weeks later, she left her coffee travel mug at my apartment. Not by accident. She set it in my cabinet, in the spot that had been empty since I'd cleared it sometime in the spring, and when I asked her about it, she said, I'm here enough. It makes sense, in the voice she used when she was being casual about something that wasn't casual at all. I said, makes sense, and did not make a thing of it. She made a thing of it anyway later, at 2 in the morning when she was lying on my couch with her feet in my lap, and we were watching something neither of us were paying attention to. I left my mug, she said. I know. I wanted to. I know that too. She was quiet for a moment. Are you going to say anything else? I already put your name on the shelf. She sat up halfway. You did not. I put a piece of tape and wrote WK. She looked at me like she was trying to decide if she was going to cry or throw a pillow. She did neither. She just slid across the couch and tucked herself under my arm like she'd been doing the geometry on it for a while. Okay, she said, okay. 1 month after that, we were back in her kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, the same kitchen where none of this had started and all of it had. She was making pasta because she made pasta on Sundays when she had time, and I was sitting on the counter being useless in a way she had long since accepted about me. The radio was on. The windows were open. The afternoon was the slow, golden kind that makes the ordinary feel like enough. She handed me a wooden spoon to hold and then immediately took it back because I had shown no indication of using it correctly. You're a liability in kitchens, she said. I bring other things to the relationship. Name one. I found your car in 11 minutes. She pointed the wooden spoon at me. That was romantic, I know. She turned back to the stove, smiling at the sauce. I watched her. I watched the way she tilted her head when she was tasting something. The way she reached for salt without looking. The way her whole posture loosened when she was somewhere she felt safe. Then she said, over her shoulder, the way you say things you've been thinking but haven't been saying, hey, Bennett? Yeah. I love you. Not as punctuation. Not as the period at the end of a different sentence. I got off the counter, crossed the kitchen, put my arms around her from behind while she stirred, and set it into her hair. I love you too. Wav. She leaned back into me just slightly, just enough. Say it again, she said. She was laughing. She knew she was doing it, but I said it again, quiet, against the top of her head, meaning every part of it. The pot was bubbling. The radio was playing something from the 90s we both knew, and neither of us mentioned. Outside the window, the afternoon was still doing what it had been doing, slow and golden and completely indifferent to the fact that everything in my life had recently become exactly what I'd stopped letting myself want. I had spent 3 years being careful, being the right kind of friend, keeping my feelings folded up small and tucked away somewhere. She couldn't find them by accident. And in the end, it hadn't been a grand gesture, or the right moment, or any of the things you tell yourself you're waiting for. It had been an argument about sandwiches. It had been a parking lot on a Wednesday night. It had been a coffee mug in a cabinet and a piece of tape with her initials on it. It had been Waverly, all along, asking me to stop hiding in the sentences I said and just say the one underneath.